All right, welcome everyone. We can go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for our first Good Systems postdoc presentation series of the year. My name is Leah Sabatini and I'm the program director for Good Systems. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, Good Systems is one of 3 grand research challenges here at UT Austin, and it brings together researchers from across campus and across disciplines to investigate how we can ensure AI technologies benefit society. This research presentation series features postdocs who are working on research projects that are funded by or related to Good Systems. We have a great lineup of postdocs this spring. We'll have postdocs speaking twice monthly across the spring term. All of the talks will be at noon, most of them on Wednesdays, and we're looking forward to learning more about their research. Each talk, including today's, of course, is going to be followed by a Q&A session. So as our speaker, Tara, is talking today, feel free to drop questions in the chat, also throughout her presentation, and we will address them after the talk. With that, I will introduce our speaker today. Dr. Tara Zimmerman is also the lead organizer of this presentation series, is going to kick us off with our first talk. Tara is a Computing Institute 2020 postdoctoral researcher fellow funded through the National Science Foundation. She is working with Ken Fleischman on smart cities research within Good Systems, as well as working on projects focused on COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy, misinformation, and social media. And with that, Tara, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Leah. Trying to get my screen share. Can everyone see that? Some nods? Okay, great. Thank you, Leah, for that introduction. And today I'd just like to share with all of you some of the work that I have been working on regarding COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. Now, this is part of a larger study that I have collaborated on. My co-authors are listed here below, in which we've been examining the factors that influence trust in public health information during a pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic has really brought vaccine hesitancy to the fore, and it has been recognized as a public health threat. So the research question for this study is, what attitudes and beliefs contribute to COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy? So I want to start off with a timeline just to help you understand where the different data collections happened in the context of how the pandemic has developed. So the first confirmed COVID-19 case in the US was in January of 2020, and clinical vaccine trials began in March of that year. So our first data collection, interviewing 30 people, was in October and November of that year. And so that's before the vaccine had been approved for rollout. It was still being talked about a lot in the news. And it's also important to remember that the US presidential election happened during that same time period. So the campaigns, the vote counting, all of that was very much on the news and in people's mind when we were talking with them. So soon thereafter, the vaccine was approved and the rollout began. And so in the spring of 2021, there was a lot of vaccination going on across the country. In May, vaccination restrictions had been removed for all adults. So it was at that point that we were really interested in the people who still were not choosing to be vaccinated or trying to get appointments to be vaccinated. So our second data collection happened here in May and June of 2021. So I'll refer back to this timeline a couple times today, just to kind of help us keep in perspective where these different data collections happened. So I'll begin with a little bit of background for our study, and then I'll review the 2 different methods that we used and their individual results before concluding with the discussion. For this study, we built upon the vaccine attitudes examination scale. And this is a widely accepted framework used for examining vaccination hesitancy. And the 4 categories that it uses to talk about vaccination hesitancy that people use most often are future effects, fear of commercial profiteering, doubting effectiveness, and preference for natural immunity. So we wanted to take this accepted framework and then re-examine it in light of COVID-19 and see if there were maybe some differences emerging that hadn't been present with previous vaccinations. So also we drew from recent research, belief in conspiracy-related theories is linked to vaccination hesitancy as well as unwillingness to comply with public health recommendations. Conspiracy theories are beliefs that our lives are controlled by a small number of people secretly plotting to control everyone else, and that big events such as global pandemics are evidence of this. So conspiracy-related theories are known to gain acceptance during times of crisis, and this has definitely proven to be true. Pandemic. This graphic, which was originally published in June of 2020, shows the most widely mentioned COVID-19 conspiracy-related theories at that time. So you can see here the disinfectant and the hydroxychloroquine cures have pretty much died down. We don't hear as much about that anymore, but we're still hearing a lot of the Bill Gates, the 5G, and the bioweapon theories that are persisting. In addition, we were inspired in this work by our colleague Bo Shi's call to action, which she published in 2020, noting that a global health crisis is also an information crisis. And in addition, she co-authored a publication which outlined how adults bear a disproportionate burden of this health crisis due to the combination of social exclusion and their limited digital access. So Ken Fleischman, Bo Shi, and Min Kyung Lee received an NSF Rapid grant to help fund research for COVID-19, and I was honored to be included as part of that team. And we have built on these ideas in our research. We've got 1 paper that's been published and 3 that are either in press or in preparation. So you'll see today how the work that I led here ties in with that previous work. So using Cloud Research's prime panels, we recruited 30 older adults and conducted phone interviews with them in October and November of 2020. So this was our first data collection study. The interview instrument used critical incident tech, asking about the most recent COVID-19 public health information that participants had encountered. At that time, the vaccine was still in development. Much of the recent public health participants were receiving centered around this. And that data was so rich that we decided to pull that out and focus on it in a separate study. We recorded and transcribed interviews, and then another author and myself coded the interview transcripts using thematic analysis. Participants' positive and negative attitudes became the nodes, and then within the negative attitudes, we use the VAX scale to deductively code that data. And in the positive attitudes, we really looked for patterns and inductively developed themes because no current framework existed for positive attitudes toward vaccines. Within participants' positive attitudes, we identified 2 sub-themes. The first was seeing that vaccines were, the vaccine was a reason for hope and expressing confidence in its effectiveness and in healthcare experts' recommendations. So participants made statements such as, the stuff about the vaccine has sounded pretty encouraging. And I just heard last week about Pfizer developing the vaccine that may be available by Christmas, by December. So I was just very happy about hearing that. Another explained the impact of this news within the greater context of the pandemic. Even though the vaccine news is relatively new information for me, it's given me really good, hope and hopeful attitude. I'm pretty positive that this is going to work out and the vaccine will be ready. The second sub-theme within positive attitudes about the vaccine was trust in personal doctors, scientists, and medical experts. Examples of these comments include, I'm going to listen to my physician. Or the physician says, I will most likely do that. Trust the people who are scientists, who are working with infectious diseases for years and years. And I'm very confident. It's based in science, it's based in test groups, and it's coming from a very reputable company. It's not some company that I never heard of. Pfizer is a respectable medical organization. So within people's negative attitudes about COVID-19 vaccines, we identified 3 sub-themes, and these align with 3 of the 4 categories on the VAX scale. So the first was concern regarding commercial profiteering. For example, people said things like, the companies that are making it want to be the first ones to make it because they'll be to make money off of it. Some participants were concerned about profit motives of other holders and reflected some of the misinformation and conspiracy related thinking that was prevalent at the time. For example, I've lost my faith in that Fauci guy. Finding out that his wife has been involved with the vaccines and it will benefit him financially. Also, politicians who just want to make the current administration look bad. They want the collapse of the economy, which brings their revolution. The second sub-theme with the negative attitudes was skepticism about overall effectiveness. Some participants focused on the projected percentage of effectiveness. I don't know whether to take it or not. I'd feel a lot better if it was 99%. And perceived politicization of the vaccine's creation, approval, and rollout led some to be skeptical. I'm willing to get the vaccine now because it seems politicized again. And some participants simply wanted more evidence of the vaccine's effectiveness, saying things like, prove it is what I want them to do. Prove it. Don't tell me something works. Prove it. So the third effects, comments in this sub-theme included, I'm not really anxious to be the first in line to try it. I'd rather other people try it before me just to make sure it's safe. One participant expressed the internal conflict around this fear. Part of me wants to be first in line and just sock it to me. And then there's another part that says, wait a little bit longer and see if people are getting ill from this vaccine. More extreme fear was evidenced in comments about deaths related to the vaccine. I was just watching the news today where in one of the vaccine trials, the person died. So these results led us to conduct a further data collection to focus specifically on people who were not vaccinated, pursuing being vaccinated. So we developed a survey. We recruited 725 adults through prime panels and asked them to answer open response questions about the specific reasons and information that caused them to be more or less interested in getting the vaccine, as well as barriers to getting the vaccine. It is important to note that this survey was administered in May and June of 2021. And remember, that was after the barriers had been lifted by all states, allowing all the adults to get the vaccine. So we wanted to understand factors that influence people not to get at this point. We used thematic analysis to inductively identify themes across this. And in addition, we noticed that a lot of the information being given as not being vaccinated was missing. So we did content analysis to review each answers. We created a code book defining all 7 codes in detail, and then recruited and trained a second coder. Achieved intercoder reliability of greater than 60% using Krippendorf's alpha to validate the coding scheme, and then used that to code the full corpus. So the majority of the responses fell within the 4 categories of the VAX scale, which you saw earlier. But additionally, we had identified 3 new themes: health and scheduling barriers, personal freedom and religious objections, and COVID denial. Barriers such as convenient appointment times, long lines, where to get the vaccine, not surprising because of the timing of this survey. However, personal freedom and religious objections and COVID-19 are of particular interest as understudied. So we're going to look at those in more detail. So with personal freedom and religious objections, there were 3 sub-themes within that, and they are resistance mandates, religious objections, and conspiracy-related theories. So we'll look at each of these. In resistance to government, people really focused on the fact that they just simply didn't want to be vaccinated, saying things like, I don't want the government telling me what I have to put in my body, not interested in being forced, I think for myself, and I think it has a lot to do with government control. The second theme in this category was religious objections. So these range from broad comments such as my Bible and religion, given as reasons, to God protects me from it. If I get it, then he is calling me home. And I'm afraid it's a precursor to the mark 666, which refers to a biblical passage in Revelations alluding to the apocalypse. One individual even quoted a press release by the Catholic Archdiocese of New Orleans and included a link to the Wall Street Journal article that they were quoting. So the third sub-theme within this theme is conspiracy-related theories, many of which express a fear of being controlled by or an elite group secretly plotting against everyone else. So these primarily focus on suspicion of the government. For example, I don't trust government. The fact that those who get the vaccine may be dead in 10 years from the effects of the vaccine. And I feel as though it may be part of a bigger plan. Do not trust our world leaders to do what is best for anyone but themselves. Several people mentioned fear of magnets, microchips, and other foreign objects being inserted during inoculation, like this person who said, I heard there's a microchip in it. So besides these personal freedom and religious objections, the other new category that we identified is COVID-19 denial. So this ranged from people who didn't believe that COVID-19 was serious, it was a serious threat, such as a participant who said, I see no need to be vaccinated for something with such low risk of death and high risk of adverse effects from the vaccination. To others who in the media as part of a larger conspiracy-related theory, saying too much false information being transmitted through the media to believe that this is even a real pandemic. Another focused on political motivations, saying the whole COVID-19 BS was an attempt to keep Trump from being reelected. So as I mentioned previously, we noticed that many participant comments contained misinformation, and these fell into 7 categories. The medical category of misinformation contains comments related to an individual's health and to individual deaths. So for example, one person said, I have no desire to be a participant in an experimental drug that they're pushing on people. The scientific category contains responses related to the vaccine development, testing, ingredients. For example, Bill Gates, Mr. We Need Population Control himself, helped make the vaccines. The political category of misinformation is related to government and politicians. So one example of this is, I don't trust the governmental party in office now. They have a country falling apart they caused, and all they talk about is a shot, and that's desperation for their evil plan, the evil government. Misinformation comments related to media focus on a lack of trust. The media stretched the truth about COVID-19, and all the people that died did not die of COVID-19. Misinformation that was religious in nature contained comments about the Bible, the mark of the beast, and the number 666. An example of this is, it is the mark of the evil one and will sentence one to eternal perdition. Technological misinformation contained comments about various forms of technology that people did not trust, and then employ them. For example, Bill Gates tracking vaccines. And racial misinformation used a racist framing to direct blame for COVID-19 towards specific user groups. And as you can see, some examples of those comments are here. So our interview study in October and November of 2020, our first data collection, found mixed positive and negative attitudes toward the upcoming COVID-19 vaccine. 6 months later, in May and June of 2021, the survey probed deeper into reasons that people remained unvaccinated despite increased access. And most of those responses did fall into the existing VAX scale categories, but many participants expressed reasons for rejecting vaccines, that this vaccination in particular, that had not been identified in previous vaccine hesitancy. We found vaccine hesitance associated with personal freedom and religious objections, with COVID-19 denial, and with misinformation and conspiracy-related theories. Our findings here confirm previous work linking these factors with unwillingness to comply with public health recommendations, as well as with political ideology, religiosity, distrust of technology, and racism. Misinformation is clearly having a direct impact on individuals' decisions to be vaccinated for COVID-19. The practical implications of this work include new understanding of reasons that people choose not to be vaccinated against COVID-19. Officials may want to address the COVID-19 hesitancy from new angles. For example, focusing on the fact that healthcare decisions such as receiving should be made with a qualified doctor rather than as part of one's political, social, or religious beliefs. Public health may want to directly refute various points of misinformation. While combating medical and scientific misinformation is important, focusing on in these areas alone has been insufficient to reduce people's hesitancy toward the COVID-19 vaccine. In future pandemics or large-scale health crises, public health officials should consider identifying influential persons and organizations in the areas of politics, media, religion, technology, and race that could address harmful misinformation and be trusted by the public to share accurate information. Of course, the study has its limitations. At the time of the interviewed data collected in October and November of 2020, COVID-19 vaccines had not yet been approved by the FDA, and much information about the upcoming vaccine still provides a snapshot of during this crucial time period when the development, availability, and effectiveness of vaccines was highly uncertain. Our participants were all users of online survey platforms also. This means they may not be representative of the general population. So for future research, we recommend testing the two new categories of vaccine hesitancy that we have identified and using a larger, more diverse population as a national sample. For more in-depth study of how misinformation affects hesitancy, more specific research questions and study design would need to be employed. So to wrap up, this study demonstrates shifting attitudes toward the COVID-19 vaccine during a crucial period of the global pandemic, when the potential for a vaccine was realized and rolled out to the general population, but unclear communication and understanding led to vaccine hesitancy, driven by a larger range of social and political factors than found in previous studies. These results also illustrate the presence and prominence of misinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our work reveals that medical and scientific approaches may be insufficient to combat misinformation, which is based in religion, politics, technology, and racist ideologies. Public health officials may benefit from partnering with trusted entities within these realms to address harmful misinformation driving vaccine hesitancy. And here I have my references to share with you. And that concludes my presentation. I'm answering any questions that any of you may have. You can just unmute yourself and ask a question if you have one. Don't feel like you have to raise your hand. We're pretty informal here, so just jump in.
James, did you have your hand up? Do you want to ask
I was actually hitting the applause button, but I do have a question, which I'd be really happy to ask since it seems like a good time. I'm curious about an information practices standpoint and what we might have seen if we wanted to filter your findings through that process. So for that sort of approach. So for example, you sort of enumerated the particular conspiracy theories that were popular. And I'm curious if within your findings, you found any evidence about particularly where people are seeking or retrieving or sharing, and through what modalities they're doing those actions regarding those conspiracy theories.
Yeah, that's a great question, James. Because the interviews that we did, this was part of our larger study, and focusing on the misinformation was not part of our original intent. The questions weren't designed exactly as best they could to get that information. So what is people were telling us this, they've heard that, they've heard this, but we didn't have a mechanism in place for finding out where they heard that or asking them to document it. So it's definitely something that we made note of for moving forward, because we don't know if they misunderstood accurate information that was put out, or if what they were consuming was intentionally disinformation. So that was a big piece that was missing.
Yeah, good. Awesome. I'm really excited to hear that. And we should talk more about this later. I'm also doing a project related to disinformation where, sort of dividing between the deliberate misinformation or the deliberate seeking of conspiracy related information is very different than sort of what I consider idiosyncratic responses or interpretations of legitimate information. So cool. Definitely. Yeah, let's talk more about that later. Awesome. Good talk, by the way.
Yes. I would love to. Thank you so much.
Tara, this is David Lankus. If
Hi.
I could ask one, incredibly interesting and incredibly depressing simultaneously. Could you give us a little better sense of the sample population? You mentioned these were people on online survey groups. What does that mean? Did you do any sort of general demographic or geographic analysis?
Yes, and we do have all of that data in our paper. Just for sake of time, I didn't go into all of that here, but they were recruited from Prime Panels. So that was this online survey technology that we used, which helped us to get a pretty good balance nationally. And we really focused on getting a balance of political ideologies because we felt like that might be really important. However, we weren't able to, just because of their population that they were drawing from, who were willing to participate in this. The racial breakdown, the male, female, like all of that wasn't as balanced as we would have liked it to be. The non-binary, I mean, there were a lot of weren't collected even. So that's what we were saying about the larger nationally representative population would be definitely an important next step that we would need to take.
Great, thank you very much.
Sure. Kareem, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks so much. That was a great talk. I was a little bit curious if you should have considered those objections to mandates or like vaccine mandates or whatever they call them to be objections to the vaccine itself, because I feel like there could be distinction made between saying, hey, I don't want the government to force me to take this vaccine, but I'll still take it, I just don't want to be forced to do it, because in one of the quotes, it seemed to be a little ambiguous what they were referring to.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So what we did, that was mainly in the first data collection. So that's when it was still a bit up in the air. And then a lot of people ended up taking it, right? And then the people who still weren't getting vaccinated. So my belief is that there were a lot of people in the set of people who were vaccinated in early 20 who said, I don't like the government telling me what to do, but I kind of feel like I need to do this for a reason. Those weren't second data collection. So finding out how many people like had those types of reservations ahead and got vaccinated anyway would have been really interesting, but we specifically excluded all the vaccinated people in our second data collection, so we didn't capture that information. So I hope that answers your question. Gordon, did you have a question?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your great work, and thank you for a lovely presentation today. Very, very nice. I apologize, I was a little bit late on. I'm a futurist. I'm based out here in Bastrop, Texas, a little bit outside of Austin. Been around since about 04, 06 or so in Austin. I'm currently a PhD student, and I'm focused on consciousness at the Maharishi International University based out of Iowa, but I'm physically in Bastrop. My question therefore around consciousness, and what we see in consciousness is sort of, consciousness is the basis for knowledge, like what you're aware of is what you know, and that is a basis for what you think, and that's a basis for what actions you might take, and that's a basis for kind of your achievements, what you create, and ultimately your fulfillment. So sort of a continuum from consciousness to fulfillment. And so, in the context of your talk, and of course this is probably outside of your research, but just kind of a question that I'm curious about is, if you cast your mind back, I'm not sure if anyone on this call is old enough to remember, but there was a great debate between the Betamax and VHS recording systems many a year ago. And those of us with a little bit of a techie background as well know that the one that was the best was actually the Betamax, and the VHS, people became aware of and were conscious of and made decisions. And who do you know with a Betamax recorder, or frankly even VHS for that matter these days, which for the millennials or pre-millennials on the call, or ancient recording device. So kind of my long-winded question is, this idea of is conscious filtering and accessing our consciousness. One of the ways, I'm looking at is meditation, a kind of calmer mindset. Generally, everyone can have, kind of, what good is in order to create, good systems. So any thoughts about that in terms of, what people are actually aware of in their limited sort of stressed time, viewing the world, and then what they're then responding in these sort of surveys.
I think that's a really good point and a really good question. I know that there are some folks who've done some research into different types of misinformation and disinformation that people are aware of, but possibly are aware of because they're refuting it. So maybe I share something that's untrue, but with a note that says, can you believe anyone would believe this? Or when someone's sharing this, it's not true, be careful. And I don't know of any studies yet that have come out that have really parsed that line between awareness and true belief or subscription to a belief set. It's kind of a tricky question when you talk about consciousness. I think that's a really interesting angle.
Maybe we can follow up at some point. I'm actually digging into that quite deeply, and I have a little paper coming out this year, so a little pilot study. So I'd love to talk more about the kind of underlying mechanisms that have us kind of look at the world in a certain way, and what is it to be good and do good.
Yeah, that's great. Any other questions? Don't want to keep everyone any longer than necessary. I know everybody has lots of things. Apologize for being depressing. I heard that from a couple different people. So yeah, well, I just feel like awareness is a start, right? So maybe we can help address some of these issues. So anyway, thank you all for your attentiveness and for participating, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions or follow-up you have. I would love to talk with you more about it. And I'll turn it back over to Leah.
Great. Thank you so much, Tara. That was a great talk. Thank you for raising our awareness, even though it's a little hard to swallow. We appreciate it. And all of you, thank you so much for joining for this first talk of the spring. The next one is coming up on February 3rd. We have Stephen Sloda, who will be presenting then, and you can register through our registration link, which I can pop into the chat right now in case you haven't registered for that already. All right, well, thanks again, Tara. And we look forward to seeing you all at our future series.
Thanks, everybody.